Welcome, everybody, to Conversations with CAGT. We're getting closer to spring, and thank you for joining us tonight. We've got Dr. Nancy Hertzog with us tonight, and I'm Mark Hess. I'm the past president of Colorado Association for Gifted and Talented, and I invited Dr. Hertzog because she's one of my favorite colleagues on the NAGC, National Association for Gifted and Talented board. And Dr. Hertzog is a part of the executive board as NAGC's treasurer. And she's going to chat with us tonight about our youngest gifted learners, a topic that we don't get to talk about all that often. It's not one of our focus, right? And so I'm really looking forward to hearing this presentation tonight. If you have questions along the way, please drop them into the chat, and I'll save up those questions for the end of the presentation. And so, welcome, Nancy. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you to Colorado and to Mark. He's asked me to talk about my favorite topic. So I am really excited about the things I'm going to share with you tonight. The title of the talk is called Designing the Learning Environment to Challenge and Stimulate Young Children, Inspirations from Reggio Emilia, Italy. And I'm now preparing to take 21, a group of 21 of us. It's on the student professor study tour to Reggio Emilia in March. Well, it is March, in about 3 weeks. And so this, again, going the 10th time, I always learn so much. So I'm hoping to share with you tonight the possibilities that are offered to teachers to design environments that elicit creative and critical thinking and develop the potential of every young child. Before we begin, though, it's important for me to share with you some lenses from which I have formulated my ideas about early childhood gifted education. My experiences have impacted my priorities and values, as well as my critical lenses of the field. I started in gifted education with Joe Renzulli as my advisor. You can see how old I am in that slide. And the focus way back in 1979 was always on talent development and never on the paradigm of a gifted child, but on assumptions of creating optimal conditions for creative productivity. I also want to share that before becoming a professor, I taught for 15 years in a variety of gifted programs in 4 different states. And in all of those programs, I had to be the teacher and the curriculum developer. So my background is truly rooted in curriculum and instruction. And I became the ultimate experimental teacher, experimenting with strategies that work to challenge children in very different states and in very different contexts. When I moved to Illinois, I began teaching preschool in a laboratory school called University Primary School under the direction of Dr. Merle Carnes. At that time, she had 2 classrooms, and because I was a student of Joe's, she wanted me to do the triad model in the preschool classroom, and the other classroom was using the British primary open classroom model. So that's where I began to experiment with projects at very young children. I was a teacher of 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, and we used the triad model. And so my journey from project-based learning with 3-year-olds began with Lillian Katz working in the same building at the University of Illinois. She has been the one that articulated the project approach. And I always feel her as a mentor sitting on my shoulder and guiding me in working with young children in investigative opportunities. She's the one that introduced me to Reggio Emilia, Italy. And so I also want to say that that's my professional lens and background, but probably what's influenced my work more than any professional university course or mentor was my own experience having a 2.5 pound baby boy. And he came early. I was at a junior great books conference, and nothing has been more important in my life to realize that potential means not yet, that we cannot determine a child's potential based on anything other than growing and developing what the child is bringing to that environment. So I went back to school after I had my son Jacob because the doctor said he would have disabilities. So this personal experience made me realize that I just can't determine his potential. Potential is open-ended, and I should never make assumptions about one's potential or divide children into groups and say you have more potential than another. When he was in his 2-year-old classroom, the teacher was concerned because he wasn't socializing. She came to me and she said, he's just not socializing. I don't know what to do. He couldn't reach the pedals to play with the trikes outside. So she asked me what he was interested in. And I said, well, he plays the guitar at home constantly. He knew every song of the Peter, Paul, and Merry Christmas concert. I know that sends me back in age because we restricted his TV access. He was our first child. And the teacher built a stage by putting Christmas lights all around this platform. She cut out cardboard guitars. She put a mic on the stand, and he immediately was the leader of a band. He had other children joining him on stage. He absolutely had no problem socializing with other children. And what's notable in this slide is that the teacher redesigned the classroom environment to relate to his interest in music, and his learning flourished. So tonight, I want you to keep this idea that teachers are empowered to design the conditions for learning, and there is no trouble with his social skills. He is today an accomplished jazz guitarist. He's an assistant professor of music at the University of Arkansas with 9 albums and a former winner of the guitar competition at the Montreux Jazz Festival. And this is his daughter, who was also a miracle baby, an IVF baby. And I wanted to point this out because I want you to again look at the optimal conditions for learning, how learning is taking place. So tonight I will focus on that and the role that you play in challenging young children. This is one of my favorite quotes from the Feinberg and Mendes book. It's an old book, but the quote resonates with me. The ability to challenge children intellectually is the critical ingredient that differentiates the ordinary classroom from the distinguished one. And tonight we're going to talk about how we create distinguished classrooms. This is just a brief agenda. I'm going to focus on the power of the teacher as a creative thinker and a designer of curriculum opportunities. Notice that it's providing conditions for learning. I'm going to share photos of ateliers and adult play. They do not let you take pictures of photos in Reggio Emilia, so the photos that I have are either the ones that they've given to me or that were taken in public spaces. Some of them more than 15 years ago when I first started going there. I want you to pay particular attention how those optimal conditions for learning create student agency and meaningful activities and engage children in creative and critical thinking. Now, a comment about today's children. Let me start by acknowledging that these are not the children that I taught in my classroom when I was a preschool teacher. And definitely there were no cell phones, there were no tablets, but these are the children that are referred to as the Generation Alpha. They're born between 2013 and 2025. This is the generation after Gen Z, and they're the youngest people alive today. Sources suggest that the final members of the cohort will be born specifically in this year, 2025. So again, for those in this generation, entertainment has increasingly been dominated by electronic technology, social networks, and streaming services like we have tonight. So we need to be adept at integrating this technology as well as understanding how children learn in this society. If I ever wrote another book, I would like to call it Decision Makers, because I think teachers are some of the most important decision makers that we have. They know that small decisions have a huge impact on children, and they understand the complexity of teacher decisions. And we want you to know that you can make explicit decisions to be planful and mindful of decisions. I think that's one thing about Reggio Emilia is they're very, very intentional. So again, this is from Feinberg and Mendes. When we are stirred by a particular classroom and feel conviction about what transpires within it, It is because the adult is a skillful diagnostician and clinician, as well as teacher, and is unambivalent about his or her role as the significant adult with responsibility for everything that takes place in the classroom. And I say that because responsibility doesn't mean directive or didactic. Responsibility can be imaginative, putting things in the environment that optimize learning for young children. So as you see the slides tonight, think about what are these important decisions? How will we set up the environment? How will we organize the physical space, the psychological space, the community of learners? How do we decide what we should include and exclude? Here in the States, we're guided by standards and curriculum guidelines, and many of us have mandated curriculum, and that's fine. We can still do this with mandated curricular goals. And then how do we make pedagogical choices, adapting instruction in particular for those advanced learners who don't need the letter of the week, who don't need to be always on their own doing computer programs. They can be integrated into meaningful group projects. So I'm going to share with you and focus tonight on environments that I have seen where creativity and intellectual curiosity is valued. Let me first start by sharing a difference that Lillian Katz articulated. Again, she was the person who wrote the book, Engaging Children's Minds, the project approach with Sylvia Chard. And she talked about academic and intellectual goals. Academic goals is what she says you usually see in early childhood classrooms. They're often small, discrete bits of disembedded information, usually related to pre-literacy skills and practiced in drills, worksheets, and other kinds of exercises designed to prepare them for later literacy and numeracy learning. The items learned in practice can be right or wrong. They have correct and incorrect answers. But intellectual goals, they address the life of the mind in its fullest sense, including aesthetic and moral sensibilities. And the formal definition of the concept of intellectual emphasizes reasoning, hypothesizing, predicting, the development and analysis of ideas, and the quest for understanding. And this is why this approach is so appropriate for advanced young learners, because it emphasizes and allows them to reason and hypothesize. Even, they don't have to be right. It's the process that's so important. So let me just share a few slides that provoke our intellectual curiosity. This is an exhibit that they allowed us to walk through and that we participated in when we were there. They called them digital landscapes. This is a workshop, an atelier. Again, they provided these pictures. Each classroom, each school has a workshop, an atelier, and they also hire an atelierista who works in the larger workshop, the large atelier, and works with students to help them express their ideas with different medium. We call that 100 languages of children. This again is a picture that they've given to us on our tour, and this just shows their play with light, the light table, and it gives you a sense of the classrooms, the space, and the way they're organized. This is an outside exhibit. We are allowed to take photos outside. This is the public exhibit hall and the documentation room. This was one of my first trips when I moved here to Washington from Illinois, and that's a student pointing out where Reggio Emilia is. Some people, when we talk about the Reggio Emilia approach, think that Reggio Emilia is a person. It was actually developed by a man named Loris Malaguchi. And one of the things that they believe strongly in Reggio Emilia is that these children are our city's future. Imagine what life would be like today in the US if we prioritized children, if we realized how important they were to our future. This gives you an idea that when we're in Reggio Emilia, we're in Italy, we're in antiquity, and the aesthetics are gorgeous. There's fountains, there's vineyards. Even in February, I went once and it was raining snow, and I was so taken aback by this beautiful color umbrella. Everything is aesthetic. I share this photo is on my first trip here. this was with Lillian Katz, and these were my teachers at University Primary School. And I just share this photo because she had such a sense of humor, and she saw that humor with young children. What's important here is how the Reggio Emilia philosophy is the connection of children to the community, and they make documentation visible throughout the community. This is another phrase they have. You cannot understand the schools of Reggio unless you understand the city and community. And when you go there, one of the very first things they do is take you around the community. The image of the child is so important. The image of the child in Reggio Emilia is competent and is worthy of respect. Just think about that for a minute. We sometimes think that children coming into kindergarten are not competent. They don't have the skills. But if you think differently about the children, then you value them for the funds of knowledge that they bring. This picture was taken by one of my students, and I call this little boy the thinker. I just love this. Reggio means region. The region of Emilia is very prosperous. Just to give you some context, it's thriving. It's home to many organizations. It has a university, and it was the last holdout of the Communist Party, and now it is a strong tradition of support for socialist parties after World War II. It was the focus itself. The school was built by women. The women's organizations, they opened the schools so that the children could recover from the war. And this is an example of how old they are. 1963, the first preschools, and in 1971, the first infant toddler center. And what you have to understand about schools in Italy, up until this time, most of them were run by the church. So these were some of the first secular schools. Some of the political factors, highly mobilized again by women, involvement and investment from the city. The city pays 15% of their budget, supports the schools. And again, they believe the child only exists to the extent of which the community recognizes the child. I had to share this photo. This is the photo that my student took when we went to the gelato shop. And this is a little girl, her parents owned the shop, and she was in there with her mother when we came the first day. In Reggio Emilia, they have a Bill of Three Rights, that children have the right to be recognized, that teachers and others who work in the school have the right to contribute to widening and deepening conceptual frameworks, and that parents have the right to participate freely and actively in the exploration of the founding principles in their children's experience. So before every project, they bring in parents and they talk with them and they get resources from them and they collaborate. Again, this is a picture that they provided for us. This is in the Malagucci Center. The Malagucci International Center now is where we hold the conferences. It also has a school, which is preschool through, I believe it's grade 6. And they believe that education is a primary right for all children and is a responsibility of society. I just, think a minute how we would do things differently if we felt that our young children had the rights of citizenship. These rights lead to the core values. Again, I don't have a lot of time to share all of the information, but just to give you a visual image of the values that they have about projects and about teaching. For example, they have a pedagogista, somebody who's in charge of overseeing sort of how instruction is done across the schools, somebody that focuses on pedagogy, which is my favorite word of all. I would love that job. But the pedagogista sort of ensures continuity among the schools. They have an atelier, an atelierista. They have community and town involvement. They really have evolving projects, interpretation, and documentation. So again, just think about all the things that go into making these such rich environments for our students. This is an example. Again, every time I go there, they may open a school or they may have one more schools, but this is the last time I was there and they had one elementary school, which is part of the Malagucci International Center. And when you visit there, you can see projects done at older grades. So if you're not preschool through grade 3, you can see projects done in the very same fashion in older grades if you go to that school. So I'm going to move on to, in just the time that I have, some distinct features and wanting to engage you in lots of photos and let you see this approach. That it's rooted in a commitment to research and experimentation. The role of the teacher is a researcher, and that means that they're not didactic. They focus on if they put something in the environment, they use the environment as the third teacher. What will the students do? How can I provoke their thinking? They have a word for that, the provocateur, somebody who provokes thought. They have sustained staff development. The teachers have planning time. There's the presence of the Italian and cooperation of families. Tonight, I'm going to focus only on these three themes because I think these three themes are what I can take back with me. They never say you can have a Reggio Emilia school in our country because you can only have Reggio Emilia schools in the community of Reggio Emilia. But a lot of our schools, and I was telling Mark that one of the most famous ones is the Boulder Journey School in Colorado, and every year they bring about 50 teachers to our study tour. They're the largest group. So the three themes we'll talk a bit tonight is the environment as the third teacher, the 100 languages of children, and the pedagogy of listening. And I'll get to that, but just to say, it doesn't mean just hearing children. It's really a metaphor for getting to know them. So if we focus on learning environments, they're aesthetically pleasing, they're rich in vocabulary, they're rich in choices, you can see that, and they're rich in opportunities to engage children in intellectually meaningful experiences. So just again, as thinking about how you make these aesthetic environments, their block building area might have mirrors and lights and different things put into it so that the blocks make shadows on the wall, and they're making cities or airports or whatever they're making with blocks, they're showing in depth by using the mirrors and the lights and different colors of transparent objects that they shine against those block towers. They've done a lot of research on the environment, making sure most of the colors are fairly neutral, having a lot of natural elements. And there is literally the only clutter you see are the projects and displays that are laid out. They don't store things like we do in our elementary and preschool classrooms. So the environment as teacher, these are things you would see if you went into, you might see transparent dividers. So they have lots of open spaces, but they also have dividers, nooks for kids to work on, a lot of light tables and play with light, things hanging from the ceiling to capture the light. So you have prisms in some areas, a focus on materials that are displayed beautifully. Um, one of the things that I brought back with me from university primary school is this idea that they color code things. And I thought, well, will the students keep things color coded? They loved it. They loved, putting things away in color codes and using palettes. And again, the picture on the left, this is a display where the teachers are using, inspired, by Reggio, using the color palettes to display things. Building a community. Now, these pictures of children are from university primary school. Again, I couldn't take any pictures. And I would just say that when we worked at university primary school, building a community, opportunities to work together was really prioritized. And the same is true in Reggio Emilia. A lot of opportunities for children to display their strengths by working together. Again, this is an example of the classroom. This is at the Malaguchi Center, and this is another photograph that they've given to us and this is a phrase they use, teachers must be cheering for their children. And they explained how carefully the colors were chosen for each area of the center. This is taken in one of in the recycle centers, and one of my students said, Ibella, beautiful. This is how it was arranged. Those were her words. This is the student that said that. She was able to interact with the environment. This is many, many years ago. I don't think they do let you go into the recycle center now as much as we used to be able to, but she's creating stories on the shadow wall. At University Primary School, we created a shadow wall. This is the use of an overhead projector to blow things up. They did that a lot. And this is an example of again, the workspace, the ones that they have given to us in the books. This is an example of the next theme, the 100 languages of children. The book that I have my students read before we go is the third edition of the 100 languages of children. And they talk, this is a poem, this is just an excerpt of the poem by Lois Malaguzzi that addresses the 100 languages of children. The child has 100 languages, 100 hands, 100 thoughts, 100 ways of thinking, of playing, of speaking. The child has 100 languages and 100 more, but they steal 99. And thus they tell the child that the 100 is not there. And the child says, no way, the 100 is there. And notice the way they color code the materials. This is on the left-hand side of the slide is a picture of the market. We sort of bring whatever is outside to the inside. And so it's very common for the children to sort by categories and by colors. This is also from the excerpt from the book, and these pictures were part of our slides or photos that they gave to us. There isn't a form of knowledge that is the same for every person. And I think that's what we want to think about in challenging our advanced learners. We have to be prepared for them to respond in different ways, and we have to be prepared to offer a variety of opportunities for them to respond. This is an example of how the Malaguzzi Center used to be a cheese factory. And so one of the things that you can do there is visit a cheese factory. And this is how they may store books. This was in the Recycle Center. And again, it's been many years since I've been to the Recycle Center. This is one of my first trips where they allowed us to photograph these things. And in Italy, it's not just buttons, but they're Gucci buttons, right? Rows and rows of buttons, and using the language of wire and allowing children to put sculptures outside in their work, expressions of nature. This is in one of the hallways of the Malaguzzi Center. Although the literature emphasizes that teachers don't teach art, the graphic languages are carefully chosen to enhance student representations. And here the teachers have guided the students toward the colors they see in the field of poppies to produce a large mural. It's intentional. If they're going to do sunflowers, they're going to pick with the children a palette that represents what they're seeing. So it's not random. The pedagogy of listening. When we think of that, we think, oh, they're just talking to us. But this is really about documentation, about observing and interpreting what the children are doing, about learning about the child by this observation, and revisiting the observations and looking at documentation as a way to inform the next step. And this is something, again, my critical lenses, when I think about in gifted education, how young children are identified by either some form of cognitive ability test or some form of nonverbal cognitive ability test. That's a static picture of what children can do. But ongoing documentation of what they're actually doing, it could share so much more about the strengths that the children have. It's amazing if we observe, children in nature and we see how they talk together. So documentation is a huge, huge component of the Reggio Emilia approach. And they try to make these documentation panels where they make them visible to the students and they revisit. They may come back to it and they say, do you still think about this about the bees? And do you still think that they make this sound? Or are you thinking differently about the sounds that you hear on our walk? So they're always probing their thinking. The teacher as a researcher and learner is a huge paradigm shift for those students and adults that I take with me on our trip. Instead of starting out with, okay, I have this curriculum on balls and ramps, I'm going to do these activities and the kids are going to learn physics about balls and ramps. Instead, they might put the balls and ramps out. They might watch the children. They might ask the children what their hypothesis is about how fast something will go, how far it will go. And that's because they're really curious about what the children are thinking. So if we just Think about that for a minute. If I'm curious about what children will do and what they're thinking, I'm going to pay close attention. So, what are adults interested when they're playing with light? What will the children do with their light when they take them out into the town? How will the children see their town? How will the children use the materials? A very famous exhibit is called The Crowd, and it's in clay. And you'll see a picture of it in a minute. It's in the Malaguchi Center now in the open space, where they don't have a sign yet about taking photos. And you'll see that when I get to it, you'll see how carefully the children observe what's going on. They do this with the teachers probing their thinking. These are other functions of documentation: self-reflection, evaluation, what something went right or wrong. I'm sharing some of the slides. This is the famous lion square. And of course, all the students sit on the lions and the children do too. They're with their documentation, they're mapping projects. And what they're really doing is giving visibility to what the children are thinking and doing. And Project Zero, and one of the books that they were coming out of Harvard was calling Making Learning Visible. It's hard to make when children aren't taking tests. How do we know that they're learning? So one of the most important ways is to document their words, their products, put them out in the public and show them how that reflects their higher level thinking. So children are capable of producing and expressing. When I came back from Reggio Emilia, again, the first time I was the director of University Primary School, and we were a demonstration site for the project approach, but we were very, very inspired. And so, one of the things that we wanted to do was allow people coming into the room to see how complex the children's thinking were. So we put the state standards up next to our documentation, and we showed that through the project work, the children were thinking at the highest levels. They were meeting the standards. So that's another way that if you're doing a traditional curriculum and you need to show that, wow, they really are learning the concept of gravity by doing these experiments or dropping that egg, you can put it up next to the standard and show that, yes, even by doing this exploratory work, they are meeting state standards. What we might call a portfolio of student work, teachers call collections. And I love that better because it sort of means more artifacts than just paper and pencil things. Each student has a collection of materials that tell a story of their work. Teachers and students take photographs, they use sketches and drawings, and they produce other artifacts that represent their thinking about topics. Reflection and self-evaluation are critical components to enhance the depth of the children's thinking and inform teachers about how they respond in order to challenge the children even more. So this is ongoing assessment. And many people ask me about young gifted children and how do we identify them. And my number one response is you identify their strengths by using ongoing assessment and documentation. You're not looking to identify is the child gifted or not. Remember the word potential? We don't know yet. But we do know by careful observation, by careful documentation, we know what they're thinking. We know if they're thinking in complex ways. We know if they're reading. We know if they're doing mathematical thinking by this process. So, how do we identify strengths and talents of young children? By using this kind of project-based curriculum and documentation so that you see that there is no bottom level. The children can pursue investigations and pursue their trains of thought through ongoing diving into deep project investigations. And again, the progezione, and I'm still taking Duolingo, so I'm not very good at Italian, but this word means projects. And the teachers say in order for us to guide good projects, We have to ask oneself good questions. So they teach the students about this. They allow students to hypothesize and to listen to other students. You'd be surprised how much documentation has, this child said this, and this child said this, and then this child said this, and they all decided, oh, that's what it really is. And so you can see this in their wonderful documentation. And they talk about declaring intents. When they ask children what they want to do to help them dive into a topic or solve a problem, they're asking in Italian, what are their intentions and why? What are their reasons for that? These are some of the projects that were shared in various trips, just to give you an idea. The project of the truck. So the children are looking out the school and they see trucks going by, and they decide to investigate how many trucks are going. Are they food trucks? Are they gasoline trucks? And so they started this investigation, and the Tiliarista wanted the children to draw the trucks. And again, we can't take pictures of this presentation, but he showed initially how when they drew the trucks, they drew it two-dimensional, and so the truck driver was looking out like this, going down the street, and the street was straight ahead of them. And so they started this dialogue. Well, how can the truck driver see if he's looking out the window? Again, it was a flat picture, and so that whole investigation was about trying to figure out perspective and drawing and what they actually saw, and that just really honed the observation skills of the children. Riddles, they were doing language riddle activities. And so they were drawing and making photographs and making riddles. Ring Around the Rosie, you know the song where they all fall down. When the kids tried to draw the pictures of them all falling down, again, they had the problem of what perspective to use. Does everybody look flat? And anyway, that was an interesting project. The human figure, the audience. I went into a classroom and there were all kinds of books about space and um, interesting astronaut gear. And I thought, oh, they're doing space. And what the entire theme was really the movements of people and how they move in space. In the other class, it was how they move in water. So, and the other class, it was the audience movements when you're inspired by dance or opera or whatever. So it was very, very interesting how they picked a theme and then they delved into it based on the interest of the students. And the most important thing to take away from this is the idea that the opportunities that are afforded to the students are often offered through graphic languages. All of the materials that you saw, the drawing, the paints, all of that. And that allows students to represent their ideas. Um, this was, again, the trip when I moved to Washington, and I took the students from the University of Washington for their first time. We met Lillian Katz. She was going from Illinois. We met her in Chicago. And again, as one of my mentors, she was mentoring my students and she was telling my students, don't ask children what they want to know. Instead, ask them what they want to find out. So I think that's a good strategy that we can really use for all of our students to get them to extend their thinking. Again, to think about how we can challenge young advanced learners in a very inclusive, aesthetic, artistic, creative environment. Now, for fun, this is what I did when I came back from my first trip with my teachers at University Primary School. We decided to do a classroom makeover. We replaced our bright plastic primary colored buckets with wicker baskets and brought more natural materials. We sorted and displayed everything in color. We started to pay attention to how we arranged the learning centers. We made them beautiful and choices. And the teachers often teased me that they could hear me coming down the steps with my high heels, click, 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 and they'd say, quick, Reggio the centers, Reggio the room. So I thought that was funny. When I came back, I wrote an article and I said, these are my impressions, that there is respect for each child. The emphasis is on relationships. I mean, imagine if you think that every child is competent, and this is what I said, this is what we think in gifted ed. The children are competent. So we don't come to it with any deficit perspectives that all children are competent, and it's our job to identify their strengths by letting them engage in meaningful curricular activities. Communication is critical. I love the fact that in Italy, the children and adults are not hurried, that the children may have projects out there and they may do them for weeks. This is from Teaching Children to Think. And I include this because if you're going to be doing this in your own environment, what he says that you have to be for creativity to have happen is you have to be an encouraging adult. You have to challenge, you have to focus on children's thinking. You have to provide children challenges to try out and value creative ideas. And don't worry about mistakes or things that are right or wrong. I never see that in Reggio Emilia. If it's a mistake, if it doesn't work, they see that as the gem, the seed for learning. And I wish we had more classrooms where it wasn't all about getting the right answer. And these are inhibiting things that adults do, especially if they're critical of children's ideas or if they don't have time, they interrupt, they're impatient. And I know as a parent, I probably have done a lot of these things. So nobody is perfect. So, I think I have about 3 minutes, and I just want to leave you with some ideas. When I came back, I started thinking about the extreme classroom makeover in a reality TV session, and I wanted teachers. I did a research project with teachers in Champaign before I moved to Washington, where we did extreme classroom makeovers. The first thing we did was we got rid of clutter. We made over the aesthetic environment. And then we thought about what else would we make over for the reading instruction. We made it much more engaging. And so I wrote these 9 episodes for a pretend show and had them copyrighted. And so these are some of the things that again, when I'm working with teachers, I ask them, what do you want to make over? In terms of how do we make it over in a way where children have autonomy, where children can act in the same ways that I was inspired by Reggio. Um, again, Alfie Kuhn's one of my favorite authors. He says the goal for learning is to create a learning experience that arouses and sustains children's curiosity, enriching their capacities, and responding to their questions in ways that are deeply engaging. So again, think about if you have the bandwidth, can you think about what you might do differently? How might my thinking changed? And then, it's your turn to be inspired by Reggio Emilia. This is the article that I wrote when I came back, Reflections and Impressions. It's a very old article. I've been writing other things about episodes that I've seen, but I'm happy to answer questions. Um, I know that maybe there'll be questions in the chat and maybe not, but I think, Mark, is it time for me to end my slideshow? And
Yeah. Um, I'm just sitting here with a little overwhelmed in a wonderful way by that. That definitely we didn't have time to get into that in the way to do it justice, but I'm so intrigued. And I was just thinking about a time that, and so my wheelhouse in elementary school is like third through fifth grade. I'm a kind of a intermediate sort of person. And I was thinking about a time that I had a group of kindergartners in my classroom, and for some reason we had some time on our hands. And I had a bunch of toy cars that we were using for physical science for some STEM activity we were doing with the older kids. And one of the kindergartners just went over and picked up one of the cars and started playing with it. And then, of course, a couple others see that it's like, whoa, there's a whole basket of cars over there. And they started playing, and I was just watching them. And so I went over and I got out some ramps that I also had. And then I had, I used to call it my junk box, a box full of stuff that we would use for different experiments and different projects. And they were wonderfully, I would say, on task in their own way and at their own choice. And that comes back to me now. And
Yeah.
of course, what did I do? I said, okay, we're out of time. We got to put everything away, right? And then we walked back down to the hall. But that strikes me as an opportunity that I may have lost, though I appreciate it and I smile about it now. But yeah. Anyway, like I said, I'm just overwhelmed in a very good way. And I don't know where to start or where to stop with some questions, but I've got a couple for sure. And so thank you.
Thank
Uh,
you for sharing that story. We're always hurried in the United States. One of the
yeah.
first things that I remember, and my one of my very first visits, we had to meet the buses to go to the schools. And we're sitting in our morning time period, and the everybody's eating their breakfast and having coffee. And the American students, all of us, get up and run to the bus on time, but the Italian educators are just going to finish their coffee. And we stood at the bus for 15 minutes until those Italian educators, who were the interpreters, were finished, and they came and joined us. And it's like they were not worried about the time that we left. They were going to finish their coffee. And I think that was just such a lesson that time is different in different societies. And we have a society where we're always rushed and hurried, and things have to start promptly on time. And in Italy, it started when we get there. The same is true with some of the sessions. We try to start on time, but they're relaxed about it, I would say.
Well, yeah, that might not go over too well at the next Colorado Gifted Conference. So there's something to be said for time, but yeah, no, I get it. It's a different way of thinking, and it seems to encapsulate so many of the best practices in gifted education in my mind. Like the question about this, like, so we're very focused on standards too, aren't we, in the United States? And I know you talked about this a little bit, but we're not going to suddenly be not focused on the standards. So, like, how do we blend in that curiosity with standards and meeting standards? And I know
Yeah.
you kind of answered that already, but maybe just a little bit more.
It's really a great question because they'll say, well, that's a stumbling block. We can't do that. But if you take a careful look at the standards, say let's pick some standards in math for young children. Um, the ability to make equal parts, or the ability to understand shapes, or if the children are, instead of worksheets about shapes, going out and making representations of buildings that they see, and identifying that the windows are square and the roof has shingles that are rectangle, and if they're doing all that, they are learning shapes, right? But they're using their community to learn about them. They're using authentic, if they're going to build a structure, they're going to have to understand a symmetry. They're going to have to understand right angles. They're going to have to understand how those things happen. And so it's not that they don't teach those things in Italy. And even at very young ages, the children are using, again, if I had more time, what they use technology, they use cameras to blow up, they're looking at a microscope of an insect, and it's being blown up from the computer camera up to the screen, and they can really see how many legs are on an insect, and they can really observe the colors, or the different phases of a butterfly, by looking very carefully and observing and using technology. Some of their beautiful murals are just things very tiny that have been put into a computer camera and blown up into this beautiful image. So all their investigations they're doing through scientific method. They're asking questions. They're measuring, all of the math that's built into that. So I think it's easy to see that standards can be applied to whatever they're doing. What I try to tell teachers is content and standards don't define instruction, right? You can learn basic facts and learn them in very creative, instructive ways, right? When children collect data, bring me back and I'll do another presentation on how children go through inquiries. But when they collect data in 3 or 4 or 5 year olds, there may just be learning how to cross out fives, and then you try to put that on a bar graph, and then you teach them a pie graph. They are learning mathematical skills at very young ages, very accelerated. People would say, oh, they need acceleration. It's very accelerated. But the math standards are learning how to use data, learning how to organize data, those kinds of things. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted you to just kind of say again, right? Because there would be people watching this that will be wondering about that for sure. I've spent a big part of my career in gifted thinking and about nonverbally expressed brilliance and how we can help those who tend to experience the world visually and spatially express that brilliance. And the examples you give are just like, it's amazing. Like, okay, there's blocks, but what about shadows and what about mirrors? And we don't spend that much time. Most of us in education are very verbal people. And so we don't necessarily spend time thinking about those things. And your example about the ring around the rosy and how to draw all the children falling down and then looking out of the truck, that's very complex thinking.
Yes. That's what
But
I
we
mean. It
don't tend
opened
to
up
do
my
that.
eyes. Yeah. This is why I started bringing people from the field of gifted to Reggio because, again, they're not separate. The little kids are not separated and given gifted stuff. Everybody's given these opportunities, but it depends who they are, which kid, and how the teacher is continually challenging them to meet them where they are. So, yes, and you can see again you can get some of this through the books that they have. I should have said if you go on to the website Reggio Children, they have a bookstore and you can get the books that are published with these projects. But you see how higher level thinkings are integrated into the business of the day. There's a lot of playing with nature, sorting and adding things. One of their famous projects is the playground for the birds, where they, developed a water wheel and got it to move, mechanically. And again, they are looking out their window, they see birds, they think the birds should have a playground just like they do. And this is a published project that you could buy. But it's this idea that they follow the children's ideas and they help the children get to where the children want to get.
Amazing and wonderful. So you gave us a takeaway there. We can go on the website and we can look at some of those things, and I'm gonna have to check that out. But I was just thinking as you were winding down at the end, the 9 challenges that you had that would be like the 9 different episodes of reality TV. Is that's a good place to start, isn't it? To look to if we can pause our recording, right? This is going to be on YouTube. We can pause our recording and look at those 9 challenges and then maybe choose one thing to try to implement in our classroom. Like not everything, because that's hard, but maybe one or two. Do you think that's a good start?
I think it's a good start for teachers to feel empowered. I think one of the other main messages, if you aspire to the Reggio philosophy about the environment being the third teacher, yes, you may not be able to change your curriculum, but you have the ultimate control to change that classroom environment in terms of what you put in it, how you provoke thought in it, how you can, inspire children just, putting certain books there that relate to what they're talking about. You would see children read nonfiction all the time if they're studying bugs or insects or the birds in the playground. So the teachers do have a lot of power to do that, and how they teach something instead of rote drill teaching. Could they put something in the environment that would make them want to do the addition and subtraction and the sorting or whatever it is in early childhood, so that it becomes sort of their very nature. They don't think of it as a separate lesson from themselves. This is their play. This is their work that they do. So that's the power that I want teachers to come away with, is you do have power to change the pedagogy a little bit.
And great words to end this on, too. And thank you so much for giving us so much to
Thank
think
you.
about and making us think differently. which is so important. And maybe we're following some of those tenets too, just a time to reflect about what we do, and for parents as well to reflect about, interactive play. But thank you so much for joining us.
For the opportunity.
Yeah, and we're so happy that this is going to be one of those that I'm going to be asking, suggesting for a lot of people to watch our recording, by the way. So you know that we have recordings there, and you might be hearing this on a recording, but if you're out there live with us, come to our coloradogifted.org and go to the resources, and you'll see now in the fourth year of conversations
Oh,
with CAGT. And this one is definitely a gem for us.
thank you.
So thank you again.
Thank you.
So I've stopped the live stream here. Now I just have
Good.
to stop the recording also, and I'll do that right now. Thank you again.